Welcome back, everybody. Today we're taking a deep dive into some really interesting new research that's going to change how you think about AI. We've got this paper, DeepSeek R1, Incentivizing Reasoning Capability in LLMs via Reinforcement Learning. And, well, it really has me excited about the future of AI.
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating paper. What really got me was how the researchers over at DeepSeek AI were able to get these AI models to learn how to reason on their own.
Yeah, almost like they had these aha moments.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, let's talk about these models. They've got DeepSeek R1.0, and then they have just DeepSeek R1. Can you walk us through what makes them different and why that matters?
Sure. So they started with DeepSeek R1.0, and that one was trained entirely through reinforcement learning. So instead of being fed tons and tons of data that's labeled it, basically learned through trial and error.
Oh, so like it was getting feedback on its reasoning abilities and then kind of adjusting its strategy as it went.
Right,
It's
exactly.
a huge deal,
Yeah.
right? That's like the AI learning to think for itself without being explicitly told what to think.
It is. Yeah, we haven't really seen anything like this before. And it's a big step towards AI that can learn more independently and maybe even surpass human capabilities,
Yeah.
in certain areas.
Okay, that's exciting. And also like a tiny bit scary, if
Yeah,
I'm being honest.
right.
But tell me more about this self-evolution. How does that actually work?
Well, with DeepSeek R1.0, the researchers found that it actually started solving more and more complex problems just by generating more reasoning steps by itself.
So like it figures out that if it takes its time and really thinks things through, it'll get better results.
Exactly.
Instead of just like jumping to a conclusion, it's actually learning to break down the problem and consider different approaches and then come to a solution.
Yeah,
That sounds so human-like.
it really does. And this is a key point. It's not just about AI getting faster or more efficient. It's about AI actually developing that ability to think critically and adapt its strategies, which we haven't really seen before.
Yeah, in such a demonstrable way.
Ex-
I know there's another model, DeepSeek R1, which kind of builds on those initial findings. So what's the story there?
Well, DeepSeek R1 takes things a step further. R1.0 was pretty impressive, but its reasoning processes weren't really easy for humans to understand.
Kind of like a black box.
Yeah, exactly like a black box. So with DeepSeek R1, they wanted to make the AI's reasoning more transparent and human-friendly.
So they could see what's going on inside the AI's mind while it's thinking.
Right. And so they incorporated some human-curated data to give R1 a sort of initial framework for reasoning.
So it's like giving the AI a basic set of guidelines before letting it go and learn on its own.
Right.
I see. So it's not just pure reinforcement learning anymore.
Yeah, they're adding a little bit of human guidance in there.
Interesting. And how did that work out?
Actually, it led to some pretty big improvements in DeepSeek R1's reasoning abilities. It didn't just become more accurate in its problem solving, its reasoning processes also became much clearer and easier for humans to follow.
So it's not just about getting the right answer. It's about being able to explain how it got there,
Exactly.
which makes a lot of sense, especially if we're going to start trusting AI to make important decisions.
Absolutely. Transparency is going to be super important as AI becomes more integrated into our lives. If we can't understand how an AI is reasoning, how can we really trust its judgment?
You're right. You're right. Okay, so you mentioned that DeepSeek R1 went through 4 stages of training. Can you break those down for us?
Sure. So the first stage, as we've already discussed, was that initial cold start, where it learned from human annotated examples of clear reasoning. This gave it kind of a foundation in human-like thinking.
Okay, so they were teaching the AI to think like a human before letting it develop its own strategies.
Exactly. And this was really effective. And then the second stage focused on reasoning-oriented reinforcement learning. So here they had DeepSeek R1 tackle a bunch of logic puzzles and math problems and even some basic coding challenges.
So they really put it through the ringer, huh?
We did.
Making sure it could handle different types of reasoning.
Exactly. This stage was all about honing its raw reasoning abilities, getting it to think critically and strategically.
Yeah.
And then on the third stage, they moved on to rejection sampling and supervised fine-tuning.
Okay, now those sound a bit more technical. What's going on in those phases?
Well, rejection sampling is basically a way of filtering out the AI's bad reasoning attempts. It's like a teacher saying, nope, that's not quite right, try again.
Okay.
And then supervised fine-tuning involves giving the AI more structured feedback, kind of guiding it towards those human-like reasoning patterns.
So they're refining the AI's reasoning abilities, making sure it's not just solving problems, but it's solving them in a way that makes sense to us.
Right. And this is where they expanded its knowledge base beyond just logic and math to include things like writing and other more general tasks.
Okay.
They used a mix of human-provided and AI-generated data for this stage, which is pretty interesting.
It's like they're teaching the AI to learn from both humans and itself.
Yeah,
That's kind of mind-blowing.
it is.
So what about that final stage? What happens there?
Well, the final stage was all about polishing and refining DeepSeek R1's overall behavior. They use reinforcement learning across a whole bunch of different scenarios to make sure it was helpful and harmless and still a whiz at reasoning.
So they're making sure it's not just smart, but also safe and aligned with human values.
Exactly.
Okay, that's good. That's reassuring to hear.
Yeah, and the results they got with DeepSeek R1 are pretty remarkable. In a lot of cases, it actually beats some of the leading large language models in terms of reasoning accuracy and transparency.
Wow, so they created this AI that can not only reason, but explain its reasoning in a way that we can understand.
That's right.
But I know there's more to this story. Didn't they also do something called distillation with these models?
They did, and this is where things get even more interesting. We'll dive into that after a short break.
Okay, so we're back, and I really want to hear about this distillation process. It sounds like something out of a chemistry lab.
It kind of is, basically distillation is like taking a really big, complex AI model, like DeepSeek R1, and making smaller, more efficient versions of it. You can think of it like compressing a huge file into a smaller one that's easier to work with.
So they're shrinking the AI, but it doesn't get any dumber.
Yeah, that's the idea.
How is that even possible?
Well, it involves using the big model, like DeepSeek R1, to create a ton of training data for the smaller models. So it's like the big model is teaching the little ones everything it knows.
Oh, wow. So it's like AI mentoring AI.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
But why would they want to make smaller versions of DeepSeek R1 if the original is already so smart?
Well, there are a couple of reasons smaller AI models are usually more efficient, so they don't need as much computing power to run, and that makes them perfect for using on devices that don't have a lot of power, like smartphones or even smaller things.
Yeah, so it's about making AI more accessible and practical for everyday use.
Exactly. Not everyone has access to giant supercomputers, but pretty much everyone has a smartphone these days.
That's
And another reason is that smaller models can be more specialized. You can fine-tune them for specific tasks or areas, which makes them even better and more accurate.
Oh, so instead of having one giant AI that does everything, you can have lots of smaller AIs that are like experts in their own fields.
Exactly. And the results they got with these distilled models are really impressive. They call them Quinn and Llama. And even these smaller versions were able to do better than some of the big leading large language models on some reasoning tasks.
That's amazing. So distillation is like a key part of making AI reasoning more widespread and impactful. It's not just about creating super smart AIs. It's about making sure that everyone can benefit from that smartness.
I totally agree. It's a very exciting development in AI.
Okay, so we've talked about how these models are trained and how they can be made into smaller versions. But can we go back to that aha moment for a second?
Yeah.
I'm still a little confused by how an AI can have a flash of insight like that.
It is pretty mind-boggling, isn't it? And it really shows why this research is such a big deal. Remember how we talked about how DeepSeek R10 could come up with its own reasoning steps? Well, the aha moment happened when the researchers were watching it work on a tough math problem.
Oh, okay, I'm listening. What happened?
Well, at first, R10 started solving the problem in a pretty normal way, but then it kind of paused, like it was rethinking its strategy, and then it completely changed what it was doing and started using a much more efficient and elegant solution.
Oh, so like it suddenly realized a better way to solve the problem.
Exactly. And what's really cool is that this change in strategy wasn't something that was programmed into the AI. The researchers didn't teach it to do this. It just came about naturally from the AI learning on its own.
Wow, that's incredible. So it's not just following a set of rules or algorithms. It's actually thinking creatively and adapting its approach based on what it understands about the problem. It's almost like intuition.
Yes, exactly. And this is what has so many people excited about the potential of AI. If it can develop this kind of intuitive, almost human-like reasoning ability, the possibilities are really endless.
Yeah, I can see why you're so excited about this research. It really does seem like a turning point in how we understand AI. It's not just about AI getting smarter. It's about it becoming more human-like in how it thinks and learns and adapts.
Absolutely.
But I know that research isn't always easy. Were there any roadblocks or challenges that the DeepSeek team ran into along the way?
There were actually. They tried a couple of other approaches that didn't quite work out. One was called a process reward model, or PRM, and they were trying to give the AI feedback on every single step of its reasoning.
So instead of just rewarding it for getting the right answer, they tried to guide it towards better reasoning strategies as it was working.
Right. But it turned out to be way harder than they thought. It was
Yeah.
really tough to figure out how to give those intermediate rewards in a way that actually reflected all the little details of complex reasoning.
So like trying to grade a student's essay by looking at every sentence instead of just the overall argument.
Exactly. And they found that it actually led to some problems. The AI started focusing too much on those little rewards instead of really understanding the whole problem.
So it was kind of cheating the system instead of learning to reason properly.
Yeah, and then they tried another thing called Monte Carlo tree search, or MCTS, which is often used in AIs that play games.
Oh yeah, isn't it how AlphaGo beat the world champion at Go?
Yes, MCTS was a big part of why AlphaGo is so successful. It basically simulates a bunch of possible moves and outcomes so the AI can try out different strategies and pick the right one.
So they thought maybe they could use that for AI reasoning.
Right, but they ran into some big problems. One was that there are way more possibilities when you're dealing with language than when you're playing a game like Go.
So it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, except the haystack is the size of a galaxy.
Yeah, pretty much. And the other problem was that how well the search worked depended a lot on how accurate their value model was, which is what they used to judge how good each simulated outcome was.
So the AI needed a way to tell if a certain line of reasoning was likely to lead to the right answer.
Right. But it was really, really hard to train that value model to be reliable.
So in the end, they had to give up on both PRM and MCTS.
They did, yeah.
That must have been a bummer.
It was, but it's important to remember that research is all about trying new things, even if some of them don't work out in the end.
Yeah, failure is just part of the learning process.
Right, and these setbacks actually help them to improve their approach.
So where does DeepSeek R1 go from here? What are the next steps for this project?
Well, the researchers are pretty open about what DeepSeek R1 still needs to get better at. Like, it's great at some types of reasoning, but it needs to be more well-rounded in its capabilities, like things like having back-and-forth conversations and using tools and stuff like that. Those are all things it needs to work on.
So it's still a work in progress, but with a ton of potential.
Definitely. And another thing they're working on is language support right now. DeepSeek R1 is mainly optimized for Chinese and English, and they want to make it work with more languages so it can be used by more people around the world.
Right, AI needs to be able to talk to everyone.
Yeah, and they're also trying to make DeepSeek R1 better at understanding what people mean when they give it instructions. Right now, it works best when it gets very specific instructions,
Right.
but they want to make it more adaptable so it can handle more open-ended or vague instructions.
So it's like teaching the AI to read between the lines and figure out what the user wants, even if they don't come right out and say it.
Exactly. And finally, they're looking into how to make it better at software engineering tasks, which is a really tough area for large language models. But they think that with more research, DeepSeek R1 could become a helpful tool for people who write software.
It sounds like they have a lot of cool stuff planned, but even now, DeepSeek R1 is a huge step forward for AI reasoning. It's not just about AI getting smarter, it's about it becoming more human-like in how it can think and learn and adapt.
I agree. And this brings up some pretty deep questions about what our relationship with AI will be like in the future. Like, if AI can learn to reason like this, what other human-like abilities might it develop?
Yeah, that's a big question that we'll have to think about as AI keeps getting better and it goes beyond just the technical stuff about AI and into philosophy and ethics.
It's a super interesting and complex topic, and one that we could talk about for hours.
We really could. But for now, we'll leave you with that question to think about. We'll be right back after a short break to finish up our deep dive into the amazing world of AI reasoning. Okay, we're back and ready to wrap things up for our deep dive into AI reasoning. We've talked about a lot today, like all the technical details of how these models learn and also what it means for AI to be developing these human-like thinking abilities.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting conversation, and I think it's important to think about what all of this means for our listeners, for regular people who might not be AI experts, but who are using AI more and more in their lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's bring this back down to earth. What does the rise of AI reasoning actually mean for the average person?
Well, I think the biggest impact will be in how we use technology. Like, we're already seeing these AI assistants and chatbots, but as they get better at reasoning, they'll be able to do way more than just answer simple questions or remind us to do things.
So they'll be able to really understand what we need and what we want to do and like anticipate our actions and be even more helpful and personalized.
Exactly. Imagine like your AI assistant helping you plan a trip and not just booking flights and hotels, but actually knowing what kind of trips you like and suggesting places you might want to go and making a whole itinerary that fits your budget and your time.
That would be so cool. No more spending hours on travel websites trying to figure out where to go and what to do.
Right. And that's just one example. Think about healthcare, where AI could help doctors diagnose diseases better and create personalized treatments and even find new cures, or in education, where AI could tutor students individually and adapt to how they learn best and make education more accessible and interesting for everyone.
It sounds like AI reasoning could change almost everything.
It really could, but with all this potential comes a lot of responsibility. As we make these AIs smarter and smarter, we have to make sure they're still working for us and that they're used in a way that benefits everyone.
Right. We can't just keep making technology better without thinking about what it means for us ethically. We need to make sure these powerful tools are used for good.
Exactly. And that's where talking about AI ethics is so important. We need to be open and honest about the possible risks and challenges, as well as the benefits we have to make sure these systems are developed and used in a way that's transparent and fair and accountable.
And that's not just the job of the AI researchers and developers. It's something we all need to be involved in. We all need to learn about these things and help shape the future of AI.
Absolutely. The future of AI isn't set in stone. It's something we're all creating together, and the choices we make now will decide what that future looks like.
So what can our listeners do to get involved and help shape the future of AI?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed, read articles, listen to podcasts like this one, and talk to people about AI. The more you know about this stuff, the better you'll be able to make good decisions about how it's used.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions and speak up if you see something that doesn't seem right, and demand that the people developing these AI systems are being open about what they're doing.
And remember that AI is just a tool. It
Yeah.
can be really powerful, but it's up to us to decide how to use it. Let's make sure we use it to make the world a better place for everyone.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into AI reasoning.
My pleasure.
Until next time, keep learning and keep asking questions. And remember, the future of AI is in our hands.